Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of JailTalk. I am your host, Andy Abney-Bratz, Regional Sales Manager with Turnkey Corrections, and I am very excited to introduce our guest on the show today. Some of you that have been in corrections for quite some time probably don't need for me to introduce who this person is just by his beautiful mug on the page right next to me there. But for those of you that don't know, Tate McCotter is one of the, if not the highest guru or knowledge base for legal-based correctional knowledge, constitutional jail knowledge in the nation. And he hasn't paid me to say that, and NIJO's not paying me to say that, but I have known Tate for quite some time. When I was jail administrator myself, I was very familiar with Tate, legal-based part of corrections. I really grasped onto that. And with Tate and his team's knowledge, helped me grow that knowledge, and I really think that's important. But Tate McCotter, Executive Director for NIJO, National Institute for Jail Operations. Tate, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you, and I'll just say, too, you have a strong viewership, so I don't need to tell them this, but the one thing about corrections is we're very good at sarcasm, so that whole intro, I don't know where you got some of those talking points, but no, definitely not all that. It is a total privilege to be with you, Andy. Thank you for having me, and the fact that we're kind of coming up on the beginning of National Corrections Officer Week. I can't think of a better thing for me to be talking to you about the people that matter most. So thank you, seriously and sincerely, for having me. It's truly a pleasure.
The pleasure's all mine, Tate. Greatly appreciate it. For those of you that don't know, Tate's been in the corrections industry for quite some time, like I said. And, for also those that don't know, the legal-based side or the constitutional side of corrections is really what we try to hold on to, because it, made up from current cases, from cases that were won 20 years ago that are still prevalent today and still make us who we are in corrections. So, Tate, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into the industry, and a little bit about your knowledge, which is substantial, again, in the correctional-based part of, or the legal-based part of corrections.
Sure. I don't know how exciting this can be for anyone else, but, I heard a lot of people say that you don't find corrections find you as far as a career. I'm sure you've heard that. So,
oh, yeah.
Well, I'm a messed up cat. I guess I have corrections in my blood, so to speak. You've heard of a military correction or a military brat before. Well, I'm a military corrections brat. My father was military 24 years, but his last post, he was the commandant at Fort Leavenworth, the military prison. So I always thought, being on base was, as a kid, just one of the coolest things ever. And come on, the USDB at Leavenworth, for those that know that facility, that was like, it was it. And this is before they built the new one. If you go out there now, it's totally different. But you had the rotunda, the castle, as they call it. Everything was right there. And our house, the commandant's house, was actually just connected to the prison wall. So I could look out my bedroom window, and there was a tower there with a manned officer. Probably, I'll just say I was grounded a lot as a kid. Deservedly. That's just the way it was. But my older brother and I, we used to take Lego men and try to make parachutes and slingshot them over the top to watch them kind of flow down. And those poor officers, they would just look at us like, seriously, no, stop, don't. And we did it. But it was a really cool thing. My dad's my hero, always will be, and to watch him kind of do what he did with that, and it was just kind of a taste in my mouth. So, you know what, I am a corrections brat. I love it. I love everything about this profession. I love the people that I am associated with, and it's been a phenomenal time. After that, my dad was recruited by the governor of Texas to go run their entire prison system. Now, it's a lot different now where you actually, need to show publicly how much you've been able to decrease your population, right? That's the push. Well, back in the day in the 80s, and Texas has always been tough on crime. So back in the 80s, California and Texas were always vying for who had the largest prison system. And back then, this is off the cuff, I'm guessing it was around 140, 150,000 inmates. I mean, it was huge. So, I mean, they had quite they had a lot. They had a lot of population. And so we moved to Texas, and I got more skin in the game, so to speak, to be able to grow up. And they had trustees out and about working outside the walls, and it was not uncommon at all to go outside and have a trustee there, and I'd be like, "Hey, want to play some football?" And they never said no. Maybe it's because my dad was, the director, but we used to walk over, and my backyard was the Texas Prison Rodeo. Back then, that was the thing, and the amazing facility. I mean, Willie Nelson got his start there, but we had Reba McEntire. I mean, some really big names. George Strait. Tons of people would go there. Judd, you name it, and they would perform on the weekends. And so during the weekdays, especially in the summer, that place was just empty. So we used to go over and we played football games inside the arena with the inmates. Now, it was a different world, and you wouldn't do that now, obviously. But it was just a really different time. You had mentioned this before we got started. The story about one of the inmates there who I'd gotten to know quite closely just because he worked in our yard every day, and so I remember one day he came up to me as I'd come home from school, and he had said, "I need to talk to your dad," and I could tell he had a look on him. He was pretty nervous, and I said, "Dad's still at work, but can I help you?" He goes, "No, I need to talk to your dad now. Go get your mom." So I got my mom, and she comes out, and they had a private conversation, and next thing I know, my dad, comes from probably 5 minutes. He was right there because he was working in the Huntsville Walls, right across the street. But comes running over and said, "What's up?" And I see them walk over to the bushes. Now, our house, if you're familiar with Huntsville, Texas, the directors they would put you in a home, and there's a home. A beautiful, I'd call it a mansion now. It was huge. And it was right across the street from the Walls unit, which is where they did all the executions, right, and everything else like that. So where inmates at the time were released, they would walk out the street, and there was a sidewalk across the street, and then our house was on the opposite side. Well, apparently somebody had stashed a loaded 9mm inside the bushes there. And as this trustee inmate was doing the work around the yard, he was trimming the hedges, and he finds a loaded gun. Now, you can imagine the fear in thinking, they're going to think, it's mine. I didn't do this. And he was quite worried, not only that, but would there be retaliation? I mean, everything was going through his brain. And so he did the right thing. And I guess that's always also been a reminder to me of, my dad always said, if you treat people well, you certainly have to be careful and protect yourself and not be stupid. But, if you treat people well, generally speaking, it comes back to you. And here was an inmate that could have done some really bad things and did the right thing there and, turned it in, and nothing ever happened. But anyway, we had crazy things like that happen all the time. Every time there was an execution, we'd have candlelight vigils on our front lawn. So I grew up a little bit different than what maybe most people would. Saw a number of attempted escapes. After that, he ran the system in New Mexico. I don't know if I've told you this one, Andy, but I remember it was a summer morning, and I was outside practicing soccer. We had an adobe wall, and our house was right next to the penitentiary, which was where the infamous riots took place just previously, a few years before that. So I was kicking a ball against the wall there, and I hear this noise. I'm like, that's a loud rumble. That's not a normal sound around prisons. I know prison sounds by now, and that's not it. And sure enough, a helicopter just comes, just roaring, maybe 15, 20 feet off the ground, right over my head. And I'm like, that's no bueno, right?
Right.
You shouldn't have that going on. Next thing I see is this helicopter hover over the rec yard. A rope drops down, and the next thing you see is inmates just shimmying up this rope. I remember the commotion, the noises. It was crazy. It was all on. This thing picks up, takes off. There was still a guy hanging on the rope as it was leaving, and they bolt for the mountains. And a few minutes later, you see some dispatch. There was a military base, an Air Force base, just south of us, and you see these things being dispatched to chase down. And anyway, ended up 7 inmates, if my memory serves right, escaped. They only had to plan to escape 3, but when the rope and the opportunity was there, they said, "Why not?" So, yeah, that was me growing up, and I guess I got the bug. It's an awesome profession, so here I am.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting upbringing into corrections, and you're right, not the norm. I worked security at a department store and wanted to get into law enforcement. I'm like, yeah, I want to be a road officer and want to get on there. And a buddy of mine worked with me part time and said, "Hey, you should come work at the jail." I'm like, "Are you freaking kidding me? At the jail?" But I think a lot of the misconception of corrections is people just don't know, and a lot of what we do in the industry is trying to educate the public on. It's not a bad place to work. It's actually probably the safest place to work inside of your community. I always looked at it as, dealing with the most dangerous community inside of your own community, but the most safest community as well. You got backup seconds away as opposed to minutes out on the road, and got into the profession with the idea of going out on the road later in life. And then, 19 years I was retiring from my same jail I started in. With a career that I just absolutely loved. I took hold of that career and loved it as most of us do. But I didn't live across the street from a prison. I didn't have a dad that ran several state associations and prisons. But that's awesome, Tate. Now fast forward to your company, NIJO. What was the idea behind NIJO?
Thanks. It's NIJO, National Institute for Jail Operations. We started that off, and there are a lot of, well, there's not a lot. There's some organizations out there that support corrections and very appreciative. I think certainly anything that's going to enhance our profession, I'm a fan of. So why NIJO? Why did we put that together? I guess that kind of goes a little bit back to my background. I grew up watching my dad get sued. Is that a good way to start this? And we always say this in our space, as you know, Andy, it's not if, it's when. I don't care how good your administration is. To tell a sheriff or somebody that you're accountable to as an administrator, I promise under my watch, nothing bad is ever going to happen. That's not a check you can cash, right? I mean, it's not realistic. As you mentioned, we deal with a population that they don't want to be in there. They're not all Boy Scouts, Eagle Scouts. There's some rule breakers in there. There's a lot that are mentally ill. And so as far as the ingredients of what you've got to work with, and notice I just talked about the environment, never mind the facility, the staff, the everything else that comes with it. Can bad things happen? Sure they can. And so we always say it's not if, it's when. But one of the things that I guess compelled us to really get going with NIJO was we wanted to maybe take a different approach. And we saw some needs, some gaps out there of things that, as I mentioned, to grow up and watch your dad get sued constantly, you're like, these are guys that are trying to do the right things for the right reasons. And yet, to see somebody, not, your hero, my dad, my father, be defendant time and time and time again. I mean, he had one attorney that represented inmates, and this is back before Prison Litigation Reform Act was passed, but I believe he was sued 743 times by one ambulance chasing attorney. One! And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's just not right. I mean, the work is so hard as it is. Why in the world, why are we losing some of these lawsuits? And I found as I would go about and talk to people, it's not that we're idiots. I mean, this whole image of knuckle dragging jailers is wrong. And I think that's furthered by what you said, Andy, earlier of people don't know what happens inside the jail. And, it used to be what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And, you got walls up. So nobody really knows what happens there. And so then when the hands-off doctrine stopped and the courts started getting in there in the late 70s, 80s, you started to see this push toward litigation. A lot of our facilities, we're kind of going, oh man, what's smacking us in the mouth? Why is this happening? We're trying to do the right things and we're getting hit with, I'm suing you because Jell-O, you serve Jell-O. Shame on you. I don't like that. And it was very frivolous stuff. My father was sued once by an inmate because he said he was stealing his brainwaves. I lie not. Stealing his brainwaves. And I'm like, what do you say to a judge on that one? And he goes, well, I had to testify there was nothing to steal. I mean,
nice.
But, I mean, to your point, though, I mean, why do we exist? We felt like there needed to be more resources dedicated to where we're not just defensive-minded. We've got to be more proactive on how we approach our corrections management. And so instead of looking at things from a best practices standpoint of why do we do what we do? Well, we follow best practices. Well, what's best? And as you can attest, right now, there is so much divisiveness in our country. I mean, as far as what's right and wrong, just to even take the issue of, are they inmates? Are they prisoners? Are they residents? That's just a tiny, simple thing, but it can be really divisive. And so we felt like as an organization, look, it's not my place to tell you, Andy, how to run your facility. I'm not the statutory keeper of the jail. So how dare I tell you, as an elected official, how to run your place? And yet, you all get pounded all the time from outside influences, right? Saying, you need to do this. You can't do that. You must do this. What we've tried to do is put out there, this is what the law requires. And then, Andy, you go make your best decision and choices based on the information that's out there so that you can run a constitutionally safe facility. That's it. That's pure and simple. So having a legal-based emphasis with training, with all of these other things that we've kind of got components and resources to, that was the general idea.
Okay. How many facilities do you have your accreditation in currently, if you know?
Well, we work with hundreds of facilities all over the country. I'll say as far as accreditation, now, terminology-wise, accreditation is where it's a full-on, pick up the hood, look under the engine, and really dig it out. And so, we generally bring 2 or 3 inspectors, assessors, whatever you want to call them, on site. And we have a set of standards, guidelines, if you want to call them that are configured specifically to what the law requires. So, you, Andy, being from Indiana, in order to create a set of standards that are going to be legal-based, well, it's not a one-size-fits-all across the country. We have to know, what does Indiana statutes say? What does your Indiana code read? What about your 7th Circuit Court of Appeals? Because the 7th isn't the 9th. It's the 7th or 10th or whatever, or 8th. So we had to get into that. And the Supreme Court and federal acts and whatever. So we combine all those. Accreditation, we have about 600 guidelines or standards that we checklist, and that's what's under the hood. So we look at all of that. We've got a number of, a couple dozen that are either accredited going through that process. Now, is that a lot? No. Am I frustrated with that? No. Accreditation isn't for everybody. I think anybody who's done that accreditation process, and Andy, you walk through that at your facility with your sheriff, and it's not a walk in the park. But for those that do it, is there a value to that? You'd probably be able to speak for that better than I can. But what we try to do in there, it's not a gotcha. We don't want lipstick on the pig. we're really measuring, here's what the law says. Can you show that you're doing what your policy and procedures say that you're doing, and are those policies and procedures matching up to what the law requires? And so that's kind of how we approach accreditation. But we don't really get bent out of shape if somebody's not accredited, because there's a lot of facilities out there that go, yeah, we want to run a constitutionally safe facility, but we've got a lot of, we're short-staffed. Our jail should have been torn down 5 years ago, 50 years ago. So, there's some challenges, and we work with a lot of those jails to, try to get them to where they need to go. But, that's accreditation.
Okay. Yeah, I appreciate that. No, we when we were on the hunt for an accreditation, we wanted benefits such as, our liability insurance carrier would give us a break, or it looks good in the public eyes. What are we doing to help recidivism? And those are the things that we wanted to establish with accreditation. So we weren't just, trying to cover things up that we were doing wrong. We wanted to really establish a baseline on top of what our policies really were in the beginning. So, we were on the hunt, and I didn't really know where to go. So I just, did a Google search, jail accreditation. You don't really find a whole lot there. But NIJO popped up, and I saw a training coming up in southern Indiana. This was 2012, 2013. It was an in-custody death, training by you guys and Captain James Stewart. So I wanted to be a part of that. I should have knocked on wood before I went, because probably 2 months after I got back from that training, we had our first in-custody death in our new facility, and it had been 10 years since we had been in the place, and nothing yet. But, due to the training that I had from Captain Stewart and you all that came down there, I was able to piece together, our defense, if you will, just based off of, what the courts have said. And I really wanted to expand on that. So that was kind of where we went as far as the jail accreditation through your company, and I'm really glad we did. I'm, again, not being paid by Tate or NIJO, but I am a huge advocate for legal-based standards, and, NIJO is pretty much the gold standard when it comes to legal-based correctional, constitutional-based standards in the nation. But, so I'm doing what I can to push that out for you, Tate, and we'll go from there. But I do feel like it is smart. It is work. It is a lot of work, I'm not going to lie, but what we found is that a lot of our policies were already kind of geared towards that a little bit, so there wasn't a whole lot of work to do. And I know that some facilities were like, well, they're going to come in, they're going to tell us how to redo our jobs, and we got to do this, and this. Really, you don't. As long as you're following your current policies and doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're not really going to see any difference in the way you operate your facility. So that was a plus for us.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's not our place to tell you how to run your facility. Now, the courts are going to tell you, as far as how that intersects with your policies. There's certainly some what that the courts put down on you. I mean, you can get into strip search, for example, and the manner of strip search. I mean, you've got the Florence decision that really dictates. It is obtrusive. Yes, we know that can be. As far as a privacy thing, the courts get into that. No, there's no right to privacy, but the manner of search does matter. So, back in the day where it was blanket strip search, or this quote of reasonable and individualized suspicion, all that got taken away with Florence, for example. But the courts really didn't get into your space and telling you how to. And so much with, I think when it comes to operational practice, it's easy for consultants or for people to come in and go, hey, Andy, I don't like what you were doing. This is what we did in our backyard, and it worked for us, so you should do it too. Well, if the courts aren't mandating that, then we kind of feel like it's not our place to tell you that. You just need to meet what the law requires. And so if you're able to be consistent with that and do it in a way which works for you, your facility, your agency, your staff, you know what? That's a great thing, right? And I remember you all being accredited because you were the first in Indiana to do that, your county, which was a phenomenal thing. It struck me when you were doing that just how proactive you were being. I recall your sheriff going, hey, this isn't about the plaque on the wall. I don't care about the plaque on the wall. This is about doing the right things for the right reasons. So that always stuck out to me that, it's you approach that very differently. And we appreciate that kind of partnership for us. Those are the ones that kind of naturally gravitate to be not just accredited, but it's a like mindset on how we operate and what we do.
Yeah. And, I'm like you, Tate. I can sit and spitball correctional-based constitutional stuff all day long. Again, I won't bore people with all of that, but I do want to highlight, you do have some national events that come up annually, and now 3 now. You have JailCon, which is out in the west, down in the south, and now, thankfully, in the last couple of years, it's been in Indiana, which has been great for all the counties, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, who can't necessarily get down to the south or out to the west. So tell us a little bit about JailCon, and just preface a little bit. I love it, and whenever now that I'm on the sales side and I'm a vendor at these shows or a sponsor, I always ask the people, hey, what do you think about the training? And they're like, it's like all jail stuff. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. So I think that's why I love it. But tell us a little bit about JailCon and what that's all about.
And you just paid the highest compliment, and I appreciate that because we spend an enormous amount of resources and time to ensure that when we're putting on events like that, that it's beneficial. Because at the end of the day, the fact that somebody's even at a conference means somebody's pulling shit for them back home. So if you can't go back to your facility and go, I got some gold nugget here to share with you, if you didn't learn something, I mean, what are we doing, right? It's nice to see guys and gals and shake hands, bump fists, whatever, and network, so to speak, which I have to say, even sometimes we're not even that great with that. We like to gravitate to the people that we already know. But even beyond that, training really is education. And if we're not bringing the best instructors that mentally and also by experience can connect with the people that are, that put butts in the seats and the folks that are attending, then it doesn't click. And as you know, our profession, we get fished every day, right? I mean,
yep.
Con games happen every second. And so from the day that you start working in a jail or a prison or in corrections, you learn how to size people up pretty quick. So what do you think it's like when you get a potential instructor who, don't get me wrong, might have a phenomenal message with great experience, but if they haven't walked the blocks or if they haven't been engaged in this space, they don't speak the language, so to speak, right? You've got correctional people that, I'm not saying they just zone out, but it just doesn't, it's not absorbed in the same way. And then sometimes the topics aren't even relevant. I can't tell you how many times, for example, I've sat in use of force training, and if they're not talking Hudson McMillan, Whitley Alberts, or Kingsley, Hendrickson, I'm kind of looking around the room going, you're talking about use of force on the street. And in a correction setting, it's entirely different. The Supreme Court has made that very obvious. So let's make sure that we're comparing apples to apples here as we're doing the training. So going back to JailCon, that's really what we've tried to do is bring in phenomenal instructors, but we also try to make it more discussion-led. We live in a different age where, glorified PowerPoint isn't even that ain't it anymore. People want to connect and talk and discuss, and what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm a big fan of discussion because I think, look, I'm not all that. I appreciate what you said earlier, but truthfully, if I know anything, I hope it's because, number one, I try to listen, but number two, my learning has come from, I've talked to you, Andy. I've talked to this guy. I've talked to this guy. I've seen this jail, that jail, that jail, that jail. That experience combined allows me to kind of have a perspective. So it's, a wise person once said to me, I don't know everything, but I know everybody. If from a training perspective, we're sitting in a room and we're kicking spaghetti, kicking things against the wall and test driving stuff and going, well, what do you do? Well, what do you do? Without judgment, you know what? Maybe that works for them. Maybe it won't work for me. Maybe I think that's a stupid idea. But you know what? The fact that they're doing it gives me at least a plant that I can go, all right, well, that's an option. I can decide yay or nay. But that's how we've approached kind of JailCon. So rather than having, just a whole bunch of people in a room, we break them out into small, individualized, kind of bite-sized groups where we talk about very specific subjects for about an hour and a half. So almost like a training track. We have tracks for, general staff. We have line staff, supervisors, administrators, a medical track. So there's something for everybody. I think people appreciate that. And if you don't like this class, go to that one. We don't care. So it worked out really well.
Yeah, good. Well, we in the industry appreciate you doing that just because of the knowledge, and I always love to go to a jail training, especially a NIJO training, and have a sheriff in the audience. That told me that sheriff wants to learn, because not all sheriffs come from the jail. Some sheriffs, they're elected officials, so they come from the outside, and I'm not bashing sheriffs by any means, but the more you can learn about your facility and your jail, the better understanding you're going to have, because the number one person on top of that lawsuit is a sheriff if you're in a county jail. And it's our job as administrators to help protect the sheriff. So you mentioned fishing. There was, and I'm one of those weird, sick, twisted corrections guys that loves to be sued for things. And after we had our accreditation, that was, you flew out from Utah. We did a, press conference with the commissioners, and it was an awesome thing. Just a few months later, I got a publication in the mail addressed to an inmate, and I won't name the name of the publication, but you can probably figure out which one I'm talking about. And my staff were like, hey, this publication came in, this magazine came in and addressed to this inmate worker. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And it was about legal stuff, legal information. And my officers were like, are we really going to give this to an inmate? And I said, yeah, we are. Just go ahead and give it to him. So I followed up with the inmate maybe a week later, and I said, hey, did you get your publication that came in the mail? And he goes, yeah, I did, but I didn't subscribe to it. And I was like, okay, well, enjoy it. And, if you want to get more issues, then you can subscribe to that. So I, again, being twisted, I took that as a compliment because that publication was trying to test if we knew anything about constitutional law for publications and First Amendment stuff. So I really took that as a compliment. And we never received another one. So, but I always love to see that.
Example, Andy, of if administrators know the law, then, it gives you parameters by which, look, you can run that car right down the middle of the road. You can drive it on the right side, on the left side, whatever. You can swerve back and forth. I don't know, but just don't put it in the ditch. And, if you know what the law requirements are, that defines where those ditches are. In your case, you knew that. You knew that you were getting fished because that's exactly what that publication is all about. The publication isn't worth the paper it's written on, nor the subscription. In fact, he didn't subscribe to it. They were fishing. They wanted to know if you were going to reject that. And if so, did you follow, in this case, Percunia versus Martinez and Thornburg Advent, which most people never talk about. You're not taught that in academy. Very little training is out there. But they know there are some very detailed regulations which you have to follow. Actually, a 3-step thing when you deny mail to an inmate. And they wanted to know if you were following them. And they test drove you, and you passed with flying colors. They were probably hoping that you would have rejected that.
Oh, yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How can a jail administrator or a sheriff find out about NIJO's training?
Okay, well, a couple ways. Most we don't do a great job of advertising. Something that probably a lot of people know or don't know about us. We take 0 federal grant money, none. So, are we money bags? No. So if you don't hear a lot of advertising out there, I'll just say it's something as an organization we're trying to get better and better at, but we haven't spent a lot of money, self-promoting. out there, but a lot has come from word of mouth. So first of all, talk to people, and I think you'll be able to get some great info that way. Our website's great, jailtraining.org. Hard to remember. As far as JailCon that you talked about earlier, jailcon.org you can go to. So jailtraining.org, jailcon.org, both of those are great. We have a great relationship with a lot of our state sheriff associations and jail associations as well. So probably if you reached out to somebody that way, you could find us too. And then certainly just call us, contact us, and we're pretty responsive.
Okay, good. And we'll try to put your organizational link and your contact information in the comments below. So you also have an academy, a national academy that you guys have out in Utah. Is that right? Tell me a little bit about that academy.
So we put this academy together a couple of years ago, so it's fairly new. It's called Elite Academy, and just like the name would suggest, this is meant to be for, I wouldn't call it a boot camp for jail administrators, but it's a deep dive, definitely a deep dive. And we bring out probably what I would call the cream of the crop as it relates to our instructors to get in there and spend 5 full days with you. Now, I got to tell you, Andy, I would love 2 weeks, but nobody can afford that, and nobody can take the time out of office to do that. So the goal in me putting that out there as we kind of discussed the need for doing really in a very intensive training was I've watched for years, and I know a ton of people that have gone, for example, to FBINA, right? And you have your class, you have your number, you have your yellow brick, and what they've been able to do there is nothing short of phenomenal. I mean, it's just class act all the way around, right? Anybody who's been through that program is like, wow. And it's not just what you learn there, it's also the interaction. I mean, people that do that, by the time they walk out, you've got friends for life, right? I mean, people that you will connect with for a long, long time. I felt like we needed something like that in corrections. And so to put on an Elite Academy, yes, it's 5 days, but I will tell you, Andy, the relationship building that happens there, second to none. I mean, we are tight. There are no distractions. We purposely do it at the location that we do to get people to turn off their cell phones, right? To just, you're not going home. Once you're in there, we've got you stuck in the mountains, and you're ours. So the idea is to just really disconnect from everything else, get in there, and be taught. We have a strong legal emphasis, as you can imagine. It's not boring. Anybody knows, for example, Rachel Love, she is phenomenal when she teaches. We've got, you mentioned, Sean Stewart, that came out and trained years ago. He's an incredible expert witness and probably the top in the country. When you're getting sued, he's the guy that you want to call and go, help us out here. And a number of others that we bring in, leadership, whatnot. But it's just 5 really solid days of training. Again, the interaction, the discussion that takes place, it's not meant to be a big group. We limit and cap it, and we've sold out every one of them that we've done. Nice.
That's awesome. And the networking piece in corrections is definitely huge. And I remember I had a sheriff once that came back from the National Sheriff's Institute, and he was really good friends and still keeps in contact today after 15 years with a sheriff in Minnesota that he was at that training with. So in the same way with jail administrators, you get your contact information. Hey, what's going on in Colorado or what's going on down in Florida, type of thing. And really bringing it into a smaller base, I really try to tell jail administrators, call your neighbor to the north, call your neighbor to the south, because if you're that close locally, you're dealing with the same inmates. You really are. You're dealing with the same issues. And if you have 1 inmate or 5,000 inmates, you have issues. So it's all one thing.
Learn from each other. You just triggered, this was awesome. I love this. So we had an Elite Academy, and like I said, everybody's interacting. And I can't remember exactly the topic that was going on, but there was some really good bantering in the class back and forth about well, we do it like this and we do it like this. And I remember there was a jail administrator from Wyoming, a much smaller facility. It was under 50 beds, right? And she was discussing something that they do in their facility. And as you know, the smaller the jail, the more hats the administration wears, right? You do everything. You're disciplinary, your classification, you're all of it. Well, the larger facilities, you can compartmentalize, right? You have a grievance officer, you have a disciplinary hearings officer, you have somebody that's assigned to intake and booking, and that's what they do. And it's different. Same work, but you can kind of hone in on that. And there's pros and cons about all of them. But I remember watching this jail administrator from this small jail in Wyoming say something, and I looked over. I'm a people watcher. I looked over and I saw there were two attendees from a much larger jail, and they were phenomenal. They gave great input. But I saw one of them lean over to the other. And when I say much larger, it was over 3,000 beds. And the one leaned over to the other and she said, "That's a great idea. We need to take that back and do that." And I just thought, you know what, Andy, how cool was that you just saw teaching and learning going back and forth. And most doubted, I know without question, that same group probably said some things in the room that others were like, "That's a great idea. I'm going to steal that." Jail people, we're really good at stealing. We just don't share enough, right? And sometimes what we share may not be, that's how bad things happen. Sometimes we swap dirty needles. But again, if you know the law, that protects that. But the whole idea is share, right? Let's get that going. So,
yeah, and I always like to go into, because even though I don't work inside of a jail now, I still go inside of jails, to talk to jail administrators, and I always pick up something from each jail I go into, and it's like, man, I like that idea, and I'll pass it on to somebody. Hey, this county over here was doing that. But yeah, it's all about networking and definitely, being there for each other and knowing what each other do. National Correctional Officer Week. Tell me about that, Tate.
Well, we unsung heroes, first of all. Those that hopefully are watching this and listening in, you don't get enough credit. People, like we said earlier, they don't understand what you do. So as our organization anyway, you know what? Everybody kicks out an email this time of year that is remotely associated with the profession and says, "National Corrections Officer Week, thank you." And I know that's sincere, and I'm glad that happens. I think the statement that Ronald Reagan put out there when he did that, if you go back and read that, he couldn't have stated it better. I don't know who advised him when he wrote that, but what he wrote back in 1984, it still applies today. Absolutely still applies. So what we've tried to do is actually turn it into a road show, at least with our organization. This year, I think we have slated to go maybe see 60 different jails, and there's no agenda other than this. And some of them are cold calls or visits where we just stop by, and we've done it on third shift, 2 a.m. Ring the bell, right? Somebody's like, "Who are you?" And we say, "You know what? I'm Tate with the National Institute for Jail Operations. If you don't know us, don't care. We're here just to tell you thank you. Thank you for everybody in there for what you do. Much appreciation." We'll give them maybe a card, some donuts. We'll give them a plaque, whatever. But it's one thing to say thanks, and just kick it out in an email. But that personal whatever. The visit, like you said earlier, where I can look somebody in the eyes and say thank you, we don't do that enough. And so our hope with National Corrections Officer Week is let's spread some love. We need more of that out there, some positivity, and the reception has been really, truly great. I mean, the first year we did it, our deputy executive director drove all the way from Utah to Minnesota, down through your backyard, Indiana, all the way to North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and back. Over 3,000 miles. And it was a home run. People were like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that." So
That's awesome.
that's what we're doing. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, myself, along with Turnkey Corrections, echoes Tate and his team at NIJO's appreciation for correctional officers across this wonderful nation. Again, thank you for that tidbit, Tate, and greatly appreciate what you do. Greatly appreciate what your team does and is all about. And I'll always be an advocate. I'll always sing your praises, whether you want me to or not. I don't care. So I'm a corrections guy, and I'll just kind of do it. So
thank you. Well, and I would say to you all, thank you for doing this podcast, putting things out there. As I mentioned earlier, the more information we have out there, the better. We all rise higher when we're in this. Might feel like a toilet bowl, and maybe somebody needs to flush, but we're always better when we're together working on things. And so I appreciate that. And I also want to say, to current Turnkey, thank you. They've been phenomenal sponsors for things that we've done. Especially with training, and a word about training, sometimes it would be more tempting, I'm sure, to put your name on things that are readily noticeable, sponsor a dinner, sponsor or whatever else. But, who sponsors training? It can easily be missed. And I will tell you, there have been some phenomenal sponsors out there that almost under the table has said, you know what, we're sponsoring this training. Get your people out there, get them trained. And I can't say enough good about that. So thank you. To me, to see a vendor kick out money for training, that's a different kind of vendor. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anytime, as always. Tate, this has been absolutely awesome. I could go all day long, as you could as well, I'm sure, but be respectful of our viewers' time as well as your time, and I'll end the show here. But just want to say thank you again for being a guest on the show, sharing your knowledge. It's a wealth and an encyclopedia. I don't care what you say. I'm going to say it anyway. So, again, thank you very much, Tate. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Thank you. Take care. Be safe, everybody.
All right. Thank you. If you like what you've seen today on JailTalk, please subscribe, like, send us a comment if you want to see something else. Greatly appreciated, and thank you very much.